Okay.
We're getting there.
Take your time.
So thank you for taking the time to listen to this. Laura's right about utility master plans. We have to have captive audiences to be interested in stormwater master plans, sewer master plans, water master plans. But really, 2019 and 2020, we're going to be talking to you probably off and on about utility master plans. This one has been in the works, and it's been a tough one for us to completely get to the finish line. Mostly staff changes and just kind of different priorities in the department, but the Stormwater Master Plan has been a couple-year project, and Alyssa Maxwell with Brown and Caldwell is kind of leading the charge and has been, I think, when she started this. No kids, now kids, right? Is that how it really has been a long project, but it's been a comprehensive effort, and Alita, as the city engineer, has been leading the charge as well. So Stormwater Master Plan, I think, you're going to talk about all the history of our last one, but we're excited about it. The idea would be we adopt a plan, and then with that plan is usually a pretty long list of capital improvements. And that list of capital improvements is usually a challenge to figure out how we're going to fund all those capital improvements in a timely manner. So after that will come a rate and STC study. And again, this is one of a few plans that we're looking at. So hopefully you enjoy pipes and underground utilities a little bit better than that last conversation we had about underground utilities. But with that, Alyssa, and Bob Balgos is also, he's one of our staff engineers. He's a newer engineer with us. He's been with us, what, 2 months now?
2-3 months.
Yeah, so he's kind of managing the project as well. So he's inherited the project and going to deliver the project. So congratulations, Bob.
And one last thing is, last year and part of the year before, we heard a lot of public comments about stormwater. So now is your time to ask all the questions when we're looking at these master plans or these implementing documents. So, thanks.
Great. So hello, good evening. Again, my name's Alyssa Maxwell. I am with Brown and Caldwell. I'm water resource engineer, and I have been managing the consulting team that's been working on with the city to develop the Stormwater Master Plan. I personally have been working with Oregon City for quite a few years, I think about 6 or 7 years on various stormwater issues. So it's been very exciting to then be working on the larger master plan. Let's see, where are we? Assuming we're just...
Arrow. Right arrow.
I don't get music when I flush my toilet.
There we go. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so just for a little bit of background, we're talking about stormwater. So Oregon City, as you know, is rich in natural resources. You have quite a few just really amazing natural areas around the city. And so the stormwater system kind of contributes to those in both positive and negative ways. There are cities responsible for maintaining the network of stormwater infrastructure and then protecting water quality, and that's what feeds into your natural systems. There's 3 main parts to the city's stormwater infrastructure that we're looking at in this plan. The first part is the conveyance infrastructure, so that's the pipes. Oregon City has about 120 miles of piped conveyance system that the Public Works Department maintains, so that's a lot. That infrastructure is aging. One of the part of being one of the oldest cities in Oregon is that you have some of the oldest infrastructure in Oregon. So we have areas of the city where stormwater infrastructure is kind of reaching the end of its useful life. So we'll talk, part of this plan looks at how the city will move forward with upgrading or replacing those failing systems. Second part of the stormwater system is stormwater management facilities. Those are the ponds or roadside swales or those green infrastructure type planters around the city. And then the natural systems themselves, the various rivers, and then the small tributaries that you see there. A little bit of history. So as John mentioned, this Stormwater Master Plan should guide city's stormwater infrastructure for the next 10 to 15 years is what we generally like to see on a master plan. The city does have an existing drainage master plan, but it was adopted back in 1988. So we are due for a new plan. In 97, there were a series of drainage basin master plans that were developed for different concept areas. Areas like South End Concept Plan, Central Point, those areas had plans for stormwater infrastructure that were part of the larger master planning process. This master plan should come up with projects and recommendations that should address flooding and capacity, water quality, making sure that what runs off into the streams is good for the natural resource systems. We've looked at the natural systems themselves to find out where we have erosion problems and sloughing banks and where we might see degrading systems on the natural channels. We've looked at maintenance. We've looked particularly at aging system replacement. We'll talk about that. And then ultimately a list of prioritized capital projects. That's what all is going to be in the plan.
Hey, Alyssa, can I?
Yep.
I just want to make sure everybody in the room understands, because different agencies do manage their stormwater a little bit differently. In Oregon City, in theory, stormwater, the stuff that lands rain on your roof, on the streets, that's the stormwater system, and it should be separate from our sanitary sewer system. So we have a separated system. That happened a few years ago, where at one point in time we had combined systems. Interesting thing is a lot of our stormwater was actually the old sanitary system. So a lot of our pipes, sewer, are newer because when they did the sewer separation project, we got new pipes. But we use those now for stormwater, so they're really quite old. Mm-hmm. So anyway.
That is a good point. So a little bit of the planning context. Where is this plan coming from? Where is it going? So in addition to just needing a new plan from an age perspective, there is a regulatory requirement from the state under, it's a lot of acronyms up there, but the Stormwater Master Plan is a required part of the comp plan. So having these utility plans in place, as John mentioned, is part of your comprehensive plan requirements. And it's part of your commitment under those acronyms there are your pollutant discharge permit, which is a permit that you have from the state that allows you essentially to put stormwater into the stream systems. So as part of that allowance that the state gives you to put stormwater into stream systems, you need to have a master plan in place for managing the stormwater. How this plan will be used moving forward, we've talked a little bit about that already, but it's a plan to identify your capital projects. It will help define what the budget needs are. The plan helps determine growth impacts. So when we look at those impacts of new development and what should developers be required to cover with their project, you need to have these capital projects in your plan so that you can identify who should pay for them and who's contributing to those impacts. It should help align and adjust, I said, operations and maintenance programs. So making sure that public works staff are focusing on the areas that are most efficiently managing the system. And it will be input to the funding strategy, as John mentioned.
Can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. I don't mean to interrupt you, but if I don't ask it now, I'll forget it and it'll be gone. So you're taking stormwater runoff and putting it into the stream without it being treated.
In some cases, Oregon City has requirements for any new development or redevelopment project that's in place is required to provide water quality treatment for their stormwater. And as a city, Oregon City has had stormwater standards in place since 1998, was the first time that Oregon City adopted a set of stormwater guidelines that apply to new development. So development since 1998 has been putting in water quality treatment. That's those ponds that you see, vegetated swales, things like that. There are some areas of the city that even have underground treatment systems for stormwater.
But we've got a lot of runoff that originates from Old Town.
Yes.
Old Town being existing development.
Yep.
That reaches the Willamette untreated.
That's true.
From streets are dirty.
Yes.
And so are driveways.
Yeah, and the city has a monitoring program as part of the same set of regulations that require the city to be developing this plan. They require the city to monitor stormwater outfalls and look at how what the quality of that runoff is, and then to put programs in place. So you might not have a stormwater facility, but things like street sweeping helps to remove those pollutants so that they don't get into the stormwater. So that type of maintenance activity is part of the overall stormwater management and water quality strategy.
Does DEQ have anything to say about water runoff?
Yeah, so there's a whole series of requirements under your permit, and that the maintenance strategy is part of it. Having a master plan for infrastructure is part of it. The monitoring is part of it. All of that is coming from the state regulations.
So there is a program in place?
Oh, yeah, and quite a good one.
And you submit samples from time to time?
Yeah, the
to
city.
the DEQ?
Yeah, the city has a water quality coordinator that is doing that sampling and submitting annual reports to DEQ to show what the quality of runoff is.
Good questions.
Yeah. So, I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time on this one. We just wanted to touch on our process for developing the plan was first to identify where there were known problems for stormwater issues. That has a lot to do with, going out and looking at things in the field, and then also relying on the stormwater maintenance staff. There are quite a few people that work on the operations side who have been here a lot of years and really know the system well. So they were able to get us a lot of information about where there's flooding spots, where they run into clogged catch basins, where we have where residents are complaining about their stormwater. So we identified problems early and then worked through an alternatives process to come up with projects. And then came up with concepts for how to solve those problems, and now we're working on developing the plan. I'm going to talk through a little bit more detail some of these steps. So how we got here, again, we worked with city staff to identify problem areas. You're not intended to read this table. It's just an example. But we mapped problem areas across the city in different categories. So whether it's a flooding problem, an infrastructure issue, namely like a lack of stormwater infrastructure, so areas where you might be missing infrastructure, maintenance hotspots, areas where people reported problems with natural channels, and then we also mapped all of the outfalls to Newell Canyon, because we know that's a kind of a generalized challenge, is looking at where those outfalls are. We had, through that process, we have over 80 identified problem reports. Some of those are overlapping, right? You might have had the maintenance crews identified a problem and a local resident both identified the problem, so those might be overlapping. These are the categories that I just mentioned. So then our work was to, in some cases, build computer models to analyze those problems, and in other cases to do field visits to investigate them a little bit more closely, and then to try to group those problems into potential solutions. So where we're at is this is our sort of overarching stormwater master plan recommendations. So first, to replace deteriorating and failing infrastructure. The city has, in the time that we've been working on this plan, the city has purchased a video inspection truck. I don't know if this group is familiar with that, but that was a major purchase that the city made that's allowing staff to go out and actually take videos of the pipe systems. And the amount of video that's been collected over the last 3 years is very impressive. They're really working from the south end of the city north and covering large swaths of the infrastructure each year. So that's giving quite a bit of data that will help identify exactly where specific pipe segments need to be replaced. So far what they've videoed is looking quite good, but again, they've kind of been working south to north, so we haven't gotten into the Old Town area yet.
What types of new pipes, material-wise, are we looking at? This new, what is it, John, PVC?
Mostly PVC. Yeah, there's high-density polyethylene, but yeah, it's...
What's the life expectancy of that?
On the stormwater side, typically, sort of the industry standard is 100 years.
100 years?
Sometimes it's not unusual for stormwater pipes to last longer, just because you don't have sort of the stresses on those pipes that you would in a sewer system. You don't have the same gases and stuff. But in older areas of the city, you don't have that, right? You don't have that PVC pipe, you don't have that HDPE pipe. You have areas of clay pipe in small portions of the city, and those are the areas that are older and they're reaching the end of their life. Yeah. Yeah. So that's sort of a generalized recommendation. Also, we have some projects, and we'll cover some specific projects, but upsizing existing infrastructure to reduce flooding during storm events. And when you do that, those projects to upsize your pipe systems, you want to also look at any new development that's coming into the area and account for those added flows as well, right? So we're looking long-term at the plan. We look at ultimate build-out when we develop these recommendations. So install new stormwater infrastructure in underserved neighborhoods. As John mentioned, you guys have a separated system, but there's a few neighborhoods of the city that just don't have a stormwater system. And so while that water that runs off the houses is not supposed to be going into the sewer system, if the only pipes you have in the ground are the sewer system, then a lot of it makes its way in there. So we have a couple recommendations on neighborhoods that need stormwater systems. Monitor and stabilize Newell Canyon outfalls. If you are in those areas, you know that we have some areas that are eroding at outfalls, so having a program to go and monitor those outfalls and identify problems and then fix them. Increasing water quality treatment through both specific water quality projects, and then any project that is done takes a look at water quality and tries to incorporate some treatment into it. And then implement programs, I kind of mentioned this, to monitor stormwater infrastructure condition, that's the video inspection, and plan for future replacement. That's a robust program that the city is already working on that we're recommending that you continue. Here is a list of the proposed capital projects. These are the bigger projects, and I'll give you a couple examples of these, but you can see they are spread around the city. There will be, in addition to these kind of focused projects, there will be some generalized recommendations and budget recommendations to replace smaller segments of pipes. So these are, each of these dots represents a larger project that's gonna be, multiple blocks impacted, new stormwater systems. So I'm gonna give you two examples of the type of projects that you'll see in this plan. One of the biggest project recommendations is a capacity improvement through the John Adams Basin. Everything that you see kind of in the rainbow colors is different pipe sizes that we'd be recommending. This project does a couple things. So you've got localized flooding there. So this project upsizes, makes the pipes larger to deal with that higher flows. It will be replacing deteriorated pipes. So there's portions of this area that the pipes, if they're failing, we want to get in there and get them out anyway. It should improve some efficiencies in conveyance where there's some strange corners in this infrastructure system. So those will get improved, and then moving all the infrastructure to the right of way. In older areas, a lot of times we'll find pipes that are running under someone's home or something. So moving that into the right of way so you can better maintain it. And then another type of project we've mentioned, but here's an example of one of the neighborhoods. This is around Harding, where what you see, the green and red I know is tricky, but the green lines on here are the sanitary system, and there is no, the blue is the stormwater system, but through the neighborhood there's no blue lines, so this project would be putting in, the proposed system is the red line to install stormwater in an underserved area. So that would get that water out of the sanitary system as well. We have a second project for the adjacent neighborhood to the south for Rivercrest that would do the same thing. So in addition to the projects, I think we've talked about most of these additional recommendations. Mentioned the video inspection, that's that CCTV. Mentioned that doing continued inspections around Newell Canyon. And then as John mentioned, the follow-on step for this will be to develop a funding strategy for how to pay for all the projects. The next steps from our end and what you'll see next from us is, so we're taking all those proposed projects and getting the details worked out about the concept level designs, what the recommended costs are, doing some prioritization work with staff about what should come first, second, and third. And so then this plan goes through a formal review and adoption process with this commission. So the next thing I think you will end up seeing is a full application packet that'll have the full plan as a part kind of a land use application. And then we'll be back, I think we're targeting June, to be back in front of you to seek approval of that plan. So I have
John,
no questions.
These concept plans that we're looking at in terms of the Park Place and Beaver Creek, that's all gonna be incorporated with this plan here, right?
Right, so what Brown and Caldwell has done is they've projected a master plan that is citywide and at full build-out conditions, right? So that includes the full build-out of the Beaver Creek concept plan and the Park Place concept plan and the South End concept plan. So all those concept plans were considered in the master planning effort. Now, you get towards the fringe and we don't necessarily have, we rely on our standard pipes and sizes and things like that. We don't necessarily always show all those, but yeah, for the main kind of trunk pipelines, yes.
As we consider these plans, is this gonna have the force of ordinance, or is it gonna be incorporated into a budget process? Or how's that gonna work so that the planning commission doesn't have to get into the weeds on adopting these concept plans to make sure this is incorporated?
Right, so as Lisa mentioned, the stormwater master plan, as adopted through the legislative process, becomes part of our
Code?
our comprehensive plan. It becomes a supplementary document to that. So it's enforceable by way of your comprehensive plan. And our standards and our project lists, those also become developer requirements, as if they're in the Park Place concept plan area, for instance, and we've got specific improvements shown in those areas, we'll be able to reference that stormwater master plan and make that a requirement.
Just like we do on our transportation plan?
Just like we do with our transportation plan as well. Yeah, so the beauty of these plans is they give us guidance on how to maintain the system, where to do capital improvements, how to set our rates and set our system development charges. So they do all those things, but they also work hand in hand when we're sitting down and Lee's going through development review. We're trying to write staff reports and give you conditions of approval for a development that needs, maybe they need a 36-inch pipe through their development, right? We're gonna catch that and follow the concept, or follow the master plan that says, hey, by the way, developer, you gotta build this big pipeline.
And your code already requires, even without this plan, your code requires new development to look at the downstream stormwater system and identify whether improvements are needed. But putting it in the plan gives city staff that flag to say, whoa, hey, you didn't think there was a problem here, but we know there's a problem here and we need you to go about and fix it.
I had a question. On a big development like the Beaver Creek concept plan, if you know that the flow that they're going to be producing is going to affect all the way down to the treatment plant, but they're not required to cover the costs all the way to the treatment plant, just their property or a proportion of the infrastructure going down the hill? How far are they responsible to contribute?
So it sounds like you're talking wastewater, because we don't have a stormwater treatment plant, but
Right.
in this scenario,
The infrastructure though.
Yeah, so hopefully over the years, the city's done a good job of planning infrastructure, right?
Right.
And so that downstream infrastructure is, in theory, sized to handle that. Now, when it's not, then that becomes a problem, and that's often what we see in, like we showed that 12th and that area
John
in the
Adams,
McLaughlin neighborhood, where there's some pretty large diameter pipelines that are shown to replace an existing pipe network.
Yeah.
Because we've got more flow than what was originally intended. And to be honest, what was originally intended wasn't really even intended for stormwater. It was a sanitary system that got converted into a stormwater system when we did the sewer separation project. So,
Right.
Sometimes concept plan areas like Beaver Creek concept, the good news is that's new enough planned area that most of our wastewater infrastructure in particular is was built with Highway 213 and is in place. Stormwater in the Beaver Creek concept area, I don't know if it's good or bad, but a lot of that drains, we're kind of at the top of the hill. It doesn't have to drain all the way through Oregon City to get to, it drains to a creek that's to the south of the city, right? And then makes its way down through Abernathy Creek and, through that way. So, Oregon City's unique in that we've got 15 drainage basins and, kind of like that Hilltop Shopping Center, that's kind of the top of the, at least top of that part of the city. And then from there, it goes out Mud Creek, Caulfield Creek, all those other creeks that are on the south end of the city. And then there's other creeks that come down into, Singer Creek kind of basins, those areas. So,
So John, Dirk brought up a really kind of a critical question that a lot of us in Park Place were questioning. In the Park Place plan that got passed by the Planning and the City Commission, the developers were asking to reduce, or they were asking for the city to help pay for, I think it was a 12-inch or another line that came down off of Park Place to Livesey Road. Are you familiar with that? The city was saying they were responsible for the wider pipes, yet they were saying, no, we're not going to do that. The city's going to have to pick up part of that cost. And I can't remember if I think it was drainage, and because that would go into Abernathy Creek, and every year I bet if I go there tonight, Abernathy Creek's flooding, because every place else seems to be flooding. But I remember he had asked the question, who's responsible for all that downhill type of pipes and drainage? And normally with a new development, it's the developer, correct? But I noticed again, like a lot of us did, that developer was trying to pass some of that cost on to the city in this particular plan.
So that's a little bit of a loaded question, but a good question. I would just say that the idea behind these kind of master plans is that you establish that network, you establish your needs for the full build out for those developed communities. And if you have that adopted plan, right? Part of the problem is we haven't had a good adopted plan. Our last plan was 88, and we didn't do one for Park Place. We didn't do one of those basin areas. So we don't have a good pipe network plan. With this plan, we'll have a good establishment of what's going to be needed, how big those pipes are going to be, and where generally they need to be. And once we have a plan, then the next step is to doing the rate and the SDC study. And, again, those are policy decisions that are made by the city commission, but because they're more about financing these plans. But in the perfect world, they adopt rates that pay for kind of existing maintenance of existing programs and pipeline replacements of old pipelines. And then they adopt SDCs that are based on new development, right? And a charge that new developer would have to pay for every single family home to build this greater, better, full build out infrastructure system, right? So that's typically how they pay for it. And when they come in to get a development plan that says, you got to build this 36-inch pipeline through your property, often what they say is, well, I don't need a 36-inch pipeline, I only need a 12-inch pipeline. And they may be right about that. Their nexus may be that proportionality thing may say, all that they really need is a 12-inch pipeline. So the city, you need to pay for the difference between that 36-inch pipeline and the 12-inch pipeline. And how do we do that? Well, hopefully we've adopted system development charges that collect enough revenue to cover that.
You make a good point, and that's why I think it was 36 versus 12. But I remember, because the Neighborhood Association Park Place went over that whole thing document with a magnifying glass, and that's where we saw the developers asking for the city to pick up that cost. I mean, when you're building that many homes, I'm sure in the concept plan it was in there about the runoff, and the same thing probably exists for Beaver Creek and South End. And I know they're still asking for the city to pick that cost up. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but his question prompted my question of who's ultimately responsible for paying it all the way down to where it's going to release.
The city could make a policy decision that says we're not gonna require SDCs to pay the full brunt of this infrastructure plan. And if they do that, we still have the requirement that gets built. So if they make that decision but don't include enough money through SDCs to pay for that, the developer is still gonna have to build that. And he just won't get the SDC credits, or he won't get reimbursed like he would if we include the full amount. So there's lots of ways that can play out. And there's no one answer for that particular question. Every development's gonna be a little bit different, and,
I know every
So-
development, Beaver Creek, Park Place, something, they all are gonna have a lot more impervious surfaces, so all that runoff that used to be soaked into the ground in the canyons and go down to the creeks like Abernathy, they're all gonna need to go somewhere, so they're gonna go through those pipes that the city's gonna put in, those drains.
But I think I also want to highlight a way that stormwater is different from some of your other utilities. So, and the point that you just made about all the new impervious surface, city, what year did we do that? 2015 adopted new stormwater design standards. So when those new developments come in, they're not just connecting stormwater straight into city's pipes. They first have to put in management facilities that are intended to retain as much of that stormwater on site, if possible, infiltrate it into the ground on site. Often that's not possible because of the soils that we have in Oregon City. But that's where you get the ponds and the water quality treatment systems. The city's standards now require that those applicants look at low impact development strategies. That could be, pervious pavement, that could be green street infrastructure, those smaller planters, all sorts of things that can be done to reduce how much water is actually leaving your site. And the city's code now requires that what leaves the site matches what's there under a pre-developed condition. So you shouldn't have massive impacts to downstream systems with new development, because new development should be managing their own stormwater on site.
How do you measure that pre versus current? I mean, if you're saying that they have to, did you say even it?
Yep.
How do you measure what's there now when you don't know how much is actually going downhill?
Sure, yeah, so that's, we build computer models for it. It's what we do. That's what stormwater engineers do. We build
Computers
computer.
know everything.
Yeah, we do. Or, well, we could do it by hand, it just would take a long time. But there's tried and true methods that, are all the equations that we have and all the engineering calculations we do are to do just that, to calculate existing and future runoff and design systems to match it up.
But you do have to analyze that soil condition.
Yes,
Clay.
Yep,
Because
yeah.
that's only gonna be able to take so much before it
Correct.
starts to slide. on it.
City standards require infiltration testing for all sites to look and see what the soils can handle. And then otherwise you're holding it in ponds typically and releasing water at slow rates. So the water's still making its way downhill. It's just not all coming off in one swoop that requires a giant pipe. Keeps your pipes at a reasonable size. Yeah.
And that's along John's comment. You made there's 16 drainage basins associated here with Oregon City that eventually get to the Willamette probably, or some other site. But it's not as bad as if you're trying to manage traffic. Now, how do we manage traffic? Totally different. That's all above surface, and you have a road in, Molalla Avenue and 213, where here you can send that water down one of 16 different locations, and eventually gravity will take it to a stream that dumps there. So you don't have to run all that water. If you had one giant pipe up here on Hilltop and you caught all the water and you took it directly to the Willamette, that pipe would get pretty big after a while. Versus you've got 16 alternatives to use.
The only difference is, John, and when you look at Park Place, which is up on a hill, there's a lot of drainage. The whole plan was for 1,400 homes. Now you've got an area that now goes downhill and floods the Abernathy Creek, but catching all that and trying to find ways to hold it back, there's canyons in there now, and we've heard Christine Kozinski come by many times and talk about what Bob said about the soil. They're concerned with slides in the area because several homes on the other side of Holly have slid, and they're concerned about soil and the runoff, because if too much is built and you don't have the correct amount, then there are going to be slides up on those hills up in Park Place.
If you don't have a large enough capacity, it sounds like you built this capacity out and for all of the existing city territory or city limits.
Much of the built Oregon City has a system. There's some gaps where we're showing some projects, but most of built Oregon City has systems. Park Place is going to be a challenge because it's got, steep grades in some places. And so it's going to take some design power we're gonna have to hire folks like Alyssa to get it right for us, and we will have to work through those issues. But we're not adding the amount of rainfall in Oregon. That's something gonna happen. We're not changing that. We've adopted standards that try to put that existing amount of rainfall back into the ground. Obviously, if you had impervious soil where there's now a house, that kind of spots it in places. But I mean, that's the intent, is to try to get that water back. And what you can't, you hold back in a detention facility. And those can be costly and problematic, and they got their own set of issues, but that's kind of how stormwater management happens. This master plan is really about how do we manage stormwater, both quantity and quality.
Not to carry on this conversation, but it was on the news tonight that people were comparing the floods that are going on now to 96. And we all remember what Oregon City and everybody went through in 96, so I hope it doesn't continue.
That's not a problem that urbanization created. That's a snowfall problem that's happening way up, warm. So most of our flooding like that, not to say that localized flooding isn't an urban problem, but I mean, the kind of problems we're talking about today are snow melt, right?
Go fishing at Tony's Market in another week or so.
Speaking of the on-site ponds, the new ones, I know there's probably a long acronym for them, the little mini ones.
Yeah.
You see alongside the sidewalk instead of a big pond.
Correct.
How long have we been using those in Oregon City?
Well, I don't know about Oregon City. I think national level and regionally, especially, Oregon is a leader in, we call it green infrastructure or low impact development. And Oregon is one of the national leaders in that. So Portland's been putting those facilities in for decades at this point.
And they work?
They work
The
well.
history's
Yeah, we're
good?
seeing some really good, there's some great studies actually, thinking about what would apply a lot to Oregon City. City of Gresham's been doing some very detailed monitoring of those specific facilities, and they're finding, even though they have tight soils, those clay soils, just like you guys have in Oregon City, they're actually getting infiltration, better infiltration through those little facilities than you would from a big pond. And that's because the way those are built with all the plants in them, right? You keep them with lots of plants. Those plants create pathways. The roots allow water to get down into the soil. So the monitoring on those facilities is quite good. They're getting good performance.
But we adopted this new standard in 2015, I think.
Yep.
And,
That's right.
but Alita has been building them in public projects, right? Beaver Creek Road's the example that I'm thinking of.
Beaver Creek Road
10th and
College.
Main, we have a couple of them down there in 10th and Main. That was a project Alita managed. I'm trying to remember, almost the 99E projects have some element of that technology and how that gets done has progressed. But now we're at a point where, we put them in the 98 lot subdivision up on Abernathy Place. And up there, there's several properties that have those in front of them. And, they're a significant concrete structure with really no bottom in it. But in that is a series of, there's a collection pipeline, but there's also media in there. And the idea is, that most rain events, now if you've got, NOAA type, rain event, they may be overcome, but in most rain events, water won't even leave that facility. It'll go there, it'll go into that facility, it'll be evaporated or transpirated or just infiltrated into the soil, and it will never make it to the pipeline that we're talking about. So it's really, I think, the stormwater, our stormwater is our least, we've got less, that's the one utility that's got less maturity to it than any of our others, but it's starting to take shape, and, we're adopting industry standards that are being used in the Pacific Northwest, and that's what this plan considers.
How far beyond city limits does it go, John?
The plan?
Yeah.
The plan is focused on, the plan itself is focused on projects within city limits.
In city.
Yep, but we looked at development impacts through the whole UGB, correct acronym. So we looked at the longer term development, not just within the city limits.
Okay, we're at what, 35,000 population.
Yeah.
So we're projected to go out into what, 50?
Yes.
50,000? So this system takes care of that build out?
It's the same, we use the same, and I don't remember off the top of my head what year we looked at, but it's the same planning horizon that the comprehensive plan is based on. So it accounts for all the development, looking at the map, everything that's zoned for development in some way or another has been accounted for in our plan.
Any other questions? Anything more from?
No,
all of
thank you for your time tonight, I know you guys have been here a long time, appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, that was very informative.
None of this is scheduled through my living room, is it?
Well, I can show you the map, you can come tell me, hopefully not.
There are some in basements in the older parts of town, right?
No, we wanna get rid of those, get rid of those.
You'll probably come through my house up in Park Place.
I did hear someone say Tom's house, that's a.
Yeah, that's right.
Tom Gow's backyard, that's
We'll be sure to write that right into the plan.
Good job.
Laura, any comments? Did you want to talk about those 4 items or anything
Yes,
else?
I have 2 things. One is the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan implementation. You're gonna see that through a legislative file coming up. But we have our second public open house meeting tomorrow night from 7 to 8:30 at the high school and the library. And so I have RSVPs from 2 planning commissioners. What we're trying to avoid is a quorum of 4 or more. So 1 more spot available. If you're going, let me know.
I'll go.
First come, first serve.
I'll go, I need to keep informed.
I hear Tom taking up
And you
that
have
last
mine.
spot, and I have
You know I mean.
yours.
You have mine?
Yes, I do. Was that my first? I have it. Anyway,
Where's the numbers at? It's filled?
raise your hand if you're intending on going tomorrow. Yes.
Okay, so you're filled.
If Tom takes this one, he just called it. If you guys want to agree that that's okay,
I
then
just kind of keep abreast of all these annexations and what they're trying to sneak through on us.
appreciate that. And then, so okay, that's 3, but don't worry, we'll come back. We're just in this public.
I went to the first one, if somebody else wanted to go,
Yeah.
I could stay.
Not
there.
everything's a conspiracy, Tom.
I believe it is. Just like the whole
So
government.
it sounds like Commissioner Schlagenhofer is offering to have somebody take his place since he went to the first one, if somebody else wants to jump in.
Go.
No? Okay, so we're set? All right.
You bringing dinner?
But don't worry, it's not the last that you'll hear right now. As you remember with this project, we have adopted a concept plan, so the long-term vision for how the acreage across from the high school will develop or urbanize. And so now we need to assign zoning designations and tweak any portions of our code that we need to. And so that's what this project is all about. We listened to the public at the first meeting. Now we want to present some tentative rough draft design stuff and get some feedback on that. There'll be another one to come, so this isn't your last shot. The other thing is regarding the code amendments. As you recall, the Planning Commission recommended approval of a large package of code amendments, including ones related to equitable housing, to the City Commission. And that was back in, I think, October or so. The City Commission is reviewing each of those, and with their process, they narrowed down a list of issues. There were 20 issues that they were providing us guidance on, and 13 or so of those issues they provided us guidance on at the last City Commission hearing, which was the 3rd, and then the rest of the issues they're going to provide guidance to us on the 17th. So a lot of those were major issues that came up on Planning Commission. Some were not major issues that came up on Planning Commission. But with the first 13, there were 4 issues that they wanted further clarification on, or they wanted to have them bounce back to the Planning Commission for more input. You're going to hear those issues at the next Planning Commission meeting. We're going to sort of split up the issues to sort of ones that are maybe easier for you to take a look at and reconsider or talk about a little bit more. And then if there's one that's a really hard project, and that might take a little bit longer.
My concern on this, because I think both Mike and I were at the last city commission, we heard some of those. The fact is that we had a completely different planning commission, and 4 of these people are not familiar with how we came about those decisions. There's 3 of us here that could probably explain to them some of that detail. But if you weren't here during that time and how we made that decision, it's kind of rough to revisit those without going over the whole thing altogether again.
We're gonna be going over the whole thing as they relate to these
That took
specific
months.
issues. Yeah, and we did, I mean, that's what the city commission did too. We did some written guidance that summarized the bullet points of the major issues that the planning commission talked about. So, at this point, it's only the 4 issues. One of them you briefly discussed, but not in too much detail. The issues that we'll be talking about are if 3 and 4 plexes should be allowed in historic commercial, which is in Kanema, the height limit in our mixed-use downtown zoning designation. For that one, they also wanted a joint work session with you and them at a meeting just to talk about the height limit. And then they want to talk about the mailing radius when we do mailing for land use notices. Right now, it's the 300-foot radius, and we kind of talked about that a little bit, but the planning commission didn't recommend any suggestions to change that. And so that one was brought up by the city commission to just chat about to see if we have sufficient radius or not. The 4th issue is the bigger issue, and that's as it relates to 2 things. One is owner occupancy on ADUs, and then 2 is how it connects with short-term rentals and those short-term rental programs. We did hear from the Planning Commission a desire to come up with code regarding short-term rentals. Right now, if you rent your house out in residential properties for less than 30 days, you have to go through a conditional use permit, which takes time and money. And so I think the question is there other ways to do it differently? And so we can chat about that. That's going to be a bigger project, so we're going to pull that one aside and maybe try to take the other ones and see what's easy and what's hard as we work through these ones.
So did they decide on lot averaging, or is that going to come back to us?
They did not decide on lot averaging yet. It's scheduled for the 17th. So these 4 list is on the easy list. The harder list of topics is scheduled for the 17th, and that so that you may get some more bounce back to you for your advisement. I will invite the old planning commission back since they were part of it, or make them sure that they're aware. They're not obviously on the planning commission. Make sure they're aware if they want to participate in the conversation as well. But it's ultimately up to you as this new planning commission to make a recommendation
Good
back.
to hear from those on why they decided the way they did.
Sure. So we'll make sure that we're
Good
inclusive.
idea.
That's all I have.
Okay. Anything else?
One other thing.
Yes, sir.
If the other 6 members of this commission are as frustrated about what happened tonight on a simple lot partition, I don't think, it took me a little time to figure out what the heck was going on here. And what appeared to be a very simple application got kind of slowed down in terms of its ultimate approval because of due process. That's what happened. It wasn't a planning issue. It was everybody had their opportunity to speak on what they considered to be the issues involved. And that's what took the time. And that's what got things a little bit down in the weeds and took up our time, and everybody had to comment on it. And so what appears to be a slam dunk on some of these applications gets all tied up in due process, which is required because of the Fasano decision of us being quasi-judicial, and we're required to hear these things. Somewhere along the line, it might be the last statement made in one of these public comments is a finding that all of a sudden exposes itself, and that's what the decision rests on. But you gotta wait until that finding finally is expressed. It's either gonna be by an attorney, or a planner, or an applicant, or some interested or part of the staff. But whenever somebody gives their address and it ends with suite, you better listen. I don't have suite on, I live at 240 Park Drive. I don't have a suite after my address number. But you just gotta look at these things and say, what the heck is going on here, I got a little frustrated tonight, but I got to think, everybody's got their right to be heard. And that's what took the time tonight, So kudos to you guys for hanging in there, I almost didn't.
Bob, are you referring to the people out there or the planning commission talking
No,
about?
I'm talking about the due process was on that that side of the
Right.
dais, you know.
Well, I noted to these individuals down
No,
here,
I think we did a great
Yeah.
job, I really did,
I
but.
know to them, I've never seen in the 6 years that you have been on here with, I've never seen an attorney, even though it was important to them, to go outside several times to discuss it,
Yeah.
have side discussions here.
Yeah.
That's never happened in all
Yeah.
my 6 years.
Yeah.
And I knew it was critical to them, and
Yeah.
really wanted to hear what John's thinking was on one part of it, so
But,
that's
you know,
why.
When you leave a meeting, and you, in your own mind, you say, well, at least I got to be heard. Really? What's the alternative? When you don't get to be heard? You know, then
Sequestered.
they leave the meeting and say, boy, Oregon City's, you know, they're tough crowd, you know,
Right.
and unfair. So, anyway, welcome to the NFL, guys.
And I will say, I let that get a little free form, you know? It probably isn't the normal way to do those pauses like that.
But it was okay.
But I saw the importance of letting it be heard, as you said. And also, I saw that if we did that, we were going to be able to decide tonight.
Yeah.
And that's better than
Yeah.
waiting 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So,
And it
you know,
it appeared to be legal, so
Yeah.
it seemed
well,
like. Yeah,
Bill
and
would've
as
said
I was
something.
thinking about
I just need a little guidance.
when a request was made for a pause, it was the applicant that was making the request. So it didn't seem like we were,
Yeah.
that I was setting us up to be appealed for allowing a pause when it was the applicant that was asking for the
Bill
pause.
would've told
So
you.
anyway, I apologize that it took so long, but I did it so that we could
No.
not have to talk about it in 2 weeks or 4 weeks.
Important to clarify.
I
Yeah.
think the 5 minutes that you granted them,
Uh-huh.
even though it was
15
5 minutes the first time,
Turned into a
and
few.
it was seconds or a shorter period of time the second time, was the best use of our time here, even though we weren't doing anything. But it was giving us a clearer picture of what the applicant wanted, and the attorney's gotta talk to his applicant, and this can.
Right.
And all of that type of stuff.
And we got to the finish line.
So,
Right.
give
Led to a
them,
solution.
give them that
Yes,
time to
exactly.
think.
Yep.
Okay, anything else?
No, I'm
We're
good.
adjourned.
And who won the game?